It's draft week. After all the rumors and anticipation, the big event finally kicks off in just 2 days. We'll be recording live during days 1 and 2, but today we are bringing Whitewater Drafting into shore. Chuck and I break down this wide receiver class and give out final predictions for the 2024 NFL Draft. Let's light them up. I'm Jacson Bevins.
And I'm Chuck Powell.
And this is Whitewater Drafting. Welcome back to Whitewater Drafting. I am Jacson Bevins, and I am joined once more by my friend Chuck Powell of KJR. Chuck, how are you?
Oh, we're almost there. We're almost to the finish line, the golden pot at the end of the rainbow, and it is glorious.
Can't believe it, man.
Oh, man, just a few short hours away, and we will be feasting on draft picks. We'll get to unwrap those gifts that have been left and that have been a mystery to us that we've just speculated and rumored about for the better part of months. So let's do it, Jacson. It's here.
Yeah, man. Well, look, for the last 6 weeks, you and I have been attacking this thing from every angle, and we got one more for everyone listening today, including my favorite part of this draft class. But before we get into it, I want to remind everyone listening that Whitewater Drafting is proud to be sponsored by Seattle Cigar Concierge and Balvenie Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, two of my very favorite companies out there. And Seattle Cigar Concierge has teamed back up with us for a second release of the Cigar Thoughts cigars. Starting on draft day, the Cigar Thoughts Red Zone cigars, which combine a robust taste profile with a smooth Connecticut wrapper, will be available to purchase using the link on the show page for the same discounted price of $149 for a bundle of 10 stogies. So stay tuned during and after the draft to take advantage. But Chuck, look, man, you finally put together all the information and opinions you've been gathering, and you translated them into one mock draft. I've been waiting for this because I know that as we've worked through all these other mocks and we've talked about all these scenarios, I know you've got opinions on them, not only what you want to see happen, but what you will see happen. Now, to those listening, neither Mike or I have seen this mock yet. We are going to be reacting in real time to what Chuck thinks is going to or should happen starting on Thursday.
All right, and I'd like to point out a couple of things. Number one, I don't come at this, I think you put that very well. I don't come at this from a guy that's sitting down in my man cave watching video over and over, all 13 Louisville Cardinal games this year, just to get a read on their safety play. I am a gatherer of information, and then also, I've been such a fanatic of the draft process for so long. I kind of feel like how the puzzle works. I think I got a good feel for that. And you know what? Maybe I do have I just believe that I might have a little bit of eye for talent. So, just a smidge of that as well. The other thing that I want to point out before we get started is there is a society out there that really does shun the amateur mock drafter. And we've got to stop this. It's just a sad commentary on life. I mean, people are filling out NCAA tournament brackets without any, qualms at all. And they've watched zero college basketball that year. And we don't shun that person for filling out a bracket. So, no, right. I've never been in a war room, but by gum, it's my American right to fill out a mock.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. It's mock drafts are the candy you get on Halloween, I mean, there might not be a ton of nutritional value, but you're excited. You're excited to dump that pillowcase out when you get home, see what's in there. Let's see what you got.
That's a great analogy. It's Halloween candy. Can't make a meal out of it. It'll rot your teeth out. But I promise you, I won't give you dental floss. So here we go. And I'm just going to rip through it and then let you and Mike mock me all you care. And I'll even wear a mock turtleneck here on video.
Look at that.
While I do it.
Commitment to the bit.
Yeah. God. Finish out the ensemble. Am I giving you Jim Nance?
All right, Steve Jobs, take it away.
All right, Chicago. Let's go Caleb Williams. Anybody got an argument with that? Is that the number one pick here?
Hot take.
Absolutely the right call.
Spicy. Zesty.
Number 2, everybody seems to be leaning toward Jaden Daniels here, so I'll follow the trends. I'll say Jaden Daniels to the Washington Commanders at number 2. Number 3, I am going to spice it up a little bit because Jacson likes Drake May. It seems that half the league is a bit split on loving Drake May or really questioning Drake May. Minnesota has played its hand. They have to get up in this draft. And New England seems to be at least entertaining trade offers. Desperation could play a role in this thing on Thursday. I think both the Patriots and the Cardinals are going to wait to the very last second before committing to anything that's going to open them up for trades, and that's when the desperate really do get serious. So I'm going to go ahead and roll the dice a little bit that Minnesota comes up from number 11 all the way past the Chargers to number 3. It'll cost them both first rounders this year. It'll cost next year's first rounder and probably a second rounder or 2 here in the next year or 2. And I'm going to go ahead and say I saw the drool on Kevin O'Connell's lips at the NFL Combine for J.J. McCarthy. So I'm going to buck the trend that Minnesota is trading up for Drake May, and I'm going to say they're trading up for young, baby-faced J.J. McCarthy, Tom Brady Jr.
Wow. He better hit. That's all I can say. Look, I'm not gonna fault that mechanism if the Vikings do that. If they feel like there is a real delta in between J.J. McCarthy and Drake May, and they need to make sure that it's their guy that they get, and so they jump ahead of number 4 to number 3 and get him. I tell you what, man, I'm on the record as saying I think Caleb Williams is going to be the best quarterback out of this class, and the second best quarterback is going to be the one that goes to Minnesota. So if it's J.J. McCarthy, then I think he's landing in about as cushy a spot as a top 3 quarterback ever has.
4, I go Arizona with Marvin Harrison Jr. I think they're going to entertain offers, but at the end of the day, they've done enough accumulating draft assets. It's time to get some players that can be championship-level players. So they stick and pick with Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 4. And then number 5, because Minnesota, the obvious dance partners, the Chargers, and now we've already got 3 quarterbacks that have come off the board. Is anybody else going to be that aggressive and move up to the number 5 spot to take a Drake May? I'm going to say that they're not going to get the offers they want. Chargers stay at number 5, and they take a tackle, Joe Alt, to protect poor Justin Herbert, who's been getting
I love this.
Yeah,
I love this. I think this is the pick for the Chargers. I really do. Everyone's saying it'll be Malik Nabers, a lot of Brock Bowers, a lot of trading back. Look, Harbaugh wants his offensive line. He believes that the offensive line dictates the success of the team, and you have a potentially transcendent tackle waiting for you at number 5. I took this bet that the Chargers would draft Joe Alt at 5 at 9-1. So I'm really, really hoping that you're right.
Probably not going to be right about this, Jackson. Let's get it all out in the open. I'm planning on nailing a lot of these. At number 6, then I'm going to give the Giants your guy. Okay, Tiki Barber. They're not going to draft J.J. McCarthy, but they are going to draft a quarterback. So the Giants, who apparently are trying to move up to 3 to get Drake May, then get Drake May anyway at number 6. So
that'd be incredible if they get the guy that, until honestly very recently, was considered the 1A in this draft class at 6, and they don't have to trade future picks in order to do it. Holy smokes, man. That supercharges their timeline.
Well, I think if Minnesota, I think, is going to move up. But if they go all the way to 3 and bypass the Chargers, is there another team that's going to be that aggressive to come up there and get May? Is Vegas, who seems to have its eye on Penix, are they going to come up and do that? If New England has moved down from 3, are they going to move back up to 6? I think that they could do a move back up move at that moment, but I don't know if it's back as high as 6 to get Drake May. But I'm going to go ahead and put him
who should do it? No, I would love this for the Giants. You know who should be doing it that I haven't heard anybody talking about? The New York Jets should be working their ass off to get into the top 5 and take a quarterback. All their best players are young. except for their quarterback. And that guy is one injury away, one anything away, one off-field pursuit away from being gone. And look, if you don't get a quarterback this year and Aaron Rodgers stays healthy and you win 10, 11, 12 games, you're not going to have a shot at one of the top guys next year in what's supposed to be a pretty depressed QB class. So, man, you're talking about teams that might be looking to move up. I haven't heard any smoke around the Jets, but man, if I was them, I'd be working real hard at moving up if Drake May's still on the board.
Well, I put them in that gauntlet, that quarterback gauntlet, and this is what I've been talking about. This is why I think 6 quarterbacks go in the first 12 picks, because of the need of, and I'll put the Jets in there, to your point, at 10, and then you've got Minnesota originally. Now I've got New England sitting there at 11. They still need a quarterback. Denver, maybe Zach Wilson's the answer. Insert laugh.
Give him number 3 so all those Broncos all those Broncos fans keep their Wilson jerseys.
Denver's in there. Vegas is obviously in there, and I even think New Orleans is somebody that should be interested in a quarterback of the future as well. So that's 10 through 14. That's 5 picks. That's a gauntlet of teams that either need improvement now or in the future, or both. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, number 7. This is where it starts to get really crazy here.
Because everybody's been saying Joe Alt. Everybody's been saying Joe Alt to Tennessee, and your board, he's gone.
So we're not going to get the left tackle to help young Will Levis. We've already invested a lot in the wide receivers. We've got Ridley here added. We've got Hopkins. So what does a quarterback love next? A security blanket tied in. Brock Bowers, Tennessee Titans, number 7.
I haven't heard this one yet. I like it. That just seems like kind of a culture fit right there.
Yeah, exactly. Doesn't have to leave the South.
I like this. I like this, Chuck.
Yeah, and look, I think, and by the way, this is a real Chuck Powell original here. I even ran this by Charles Davis the other day when he came on my radio show, name drop. And that is that the Chiefs, if Brock Bowers starts to slip down this board, past 9 or 10, don't be surprised if the Chiefs don't come up there and say, you know what, Patrick Mahomes, we kind of love you with this Travis Kelce guy, and we don't want you to ever live without him. So let's just get his doppelganger, Brock Bowers. And so we'll have them both for 2 years, and then Brock Bowers is your guy for the rest of the time you're here. I mean, Mahomes going to be around a lot longer than Kelce.
Yeah. Well, and here's the other thing, and I'm sure you will reveal, as any great performer will in due time here, but the idea of Malik Nabers still being on the board at pick 8. Now, in my mind, if it's playing out on Thursday the way that your mock draft is going, I think phones start ringing from teams that weren't thinking about trading into the top 10. If you're the Bills, can you imagine?
I agree.
What you're considering?
Yeah.
I mean, you're almost making like a quarterback type play for Malik Nabers or Rome Odunze if he's still on the board at this point. But all right, well, I'm jumping ahead, man. I'm very curious to hear where you go from here.
I even surprised myself with how, because I am not picking them yet. Because here I am at number 8, and the New England Patriots, I think, are trading down to trade up and grab Michael Penix at number 8 in a trade with the Atlanta Falcons.
Okay.
Now, they invited
Michael Penix, top 10 pick.
They're a top 3 team in the draft, and they invited Michael Penix Jr. for a visit to New England. I mean, why do you even need to throw that smoke screen if there's no interest in it? I mean, it's not like anybody else is thinking about taking him.
Maybe they're hoping he's still there at 35. I mean, I would say there's probably a decent chance he's still there early second.
But apparently Robert Kraft has handed over some of this to his son, which is always a mistake. And I'm not saying it's a mistake to take Michael Penix. I love Michael Penix Jr. But I think New England is trading. If they trade down, then they've got another trade up. And so maybe they've identified Penix as our guy that we want, plus the extra draft capital that we get for trading down from the number 3 selection. So what do you think of Penix? Can you picture Penix in a Patriot helmet and uniform?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm into it. I mean, I feel for whichever one of these quarterbacks does go to New England, because it's going to be really hard to look good early with that dearth of talent around them. But I like Penix a lot, as everyone listening to this show knows. What kind of trade do you have them making here? Are they giving up 23 to move from 11 to 8, or something in the future?
No, they go. So they would have 11 and 23. So they would move 11 to Atlanta, and then they would. From that stage, maybe it is their second rounder. I don't know if I've even thought it out that far.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. No need to get caught in the particulars there. And the trade you had them making with Minnesota gives them lots of future firsts that they can potentially work into this deal too. All right, so we got Penix to New England at 8. What I love about this so far,
nobody was going to have this stuff.
No, this is 100% novel at this point. I'm into it, because that's how the draft is going to go. It's not like anyone is picked.
Well, I don't like to just
even
do
the top
what
10
everybody
correctly.
else is doing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So number 9, again, another shocker. This has been something rumored out there, and the Bears, they're going to try to move down, but they don't want to move down so far that they don't get the guy that they apparently covet on defense. So I'm giving them my favorite defensive player in the draft, Byron Murphy, at number 9.
Wow. Malik Nabers still on the board.
Still on the board. Not for much longer. Rome Odunze 10 to the Jets.
Good fit.
Minnesota has traded to New England, who has traded to Atlanta, and Atlanta still has the chance to move down and obtain more draft capital, and they're going to do it. Indiana comes up from 15 to get Malik Nabers.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Michael Pittman, Malik Nabers, Josh Downs, if he's your flavor, and he's definitely my flavor. I mean, you want to find out what you got in Anthony Richardson.
That's right.
Baby. Oh, baby. I love this.
12, I'm going Bo Nix. I'm standing on business here. Mm-hmm. I've said 6 quarterbacks are going to go in the first 13 picks. Denver's sitting there at number 12, so they take Bo Nix. And you know what that means? The Las Vegas Raiders, who are very quarterback needy, don't have a quarterback to draft at number 13. They were left out in the cold. So they'll just have to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives and take Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback, out of Toledo at 13.
Look, man, I want to give the listeners some red meat. I want to fight you on some of these picks. I am loving this. I am loving this for every team so far. I like,
you love a car crash. You're rubbernecking.
Well, here's the thing, because Dallas Turner is the first defensive player off the board for a lot of these mocks, the majority of these mocks, and now you're starting to see some talent that is kind of consensus top 10 slipping into these teams in the back half of the lottery, which is super fun. And I think Dallas Turner is good for sure. I think he's the best edge rusher in this class, but he's not my favorite defensive player. My 2 favorite defensive players are the first 2 that you have coming off the board with Murphy and Quinyon. So I'm into this, man. And I think that's a good pick for the Raiders.
And look, I think Dallas Turner, I mean, everything I hear about him is 10 out of 10 in ability, and yet may not have the transferable skill that they're looking for on tape. So, I mean, you've got him, the freakish athlete, versus Liatu Latu, who's just the producer. And Verse, who's probably somewhere right there in the middle of the two. So I've got Turner falling. How far? I don't know. But I go 14, Fashanu of Penn State goes to the New Orleans Saints. And then 15, I'm picking Liatu.
Because they just lost Ramczyk, right? They just Ramczyk just injury. Something happened with him. They let him go.
Yeah, their biggest need seems to be, again, this a gatherer of information, a shepherd of information, if you will. It seems to be on the offensive line. So Indianapolis is next. Atlanta is next because they flipped with the Colts.
Finally.
So that the Colts could get Malik Nabers. And the Falcons want the more productive pass rusher. So they're going Liatu Latu here, not Dallas Turner. And all of a sudden, all the cameras keep showing Dallas Turner in the green room sad.
Well, and super fun if you're an Atlanta fan, because I don't think the gap between Turner and Latu depending on how comfortable you are with the medicals of a guy who retired from football in college for injury reasons. But pure on field, I will be 0% surprised if Latu is the more productive NFL player. And so if you're the Falcons and you're able to go from 8 to 11 to 15 and pick up all of the extra assets that come with that and still get a top end pass rusher, which everyone thinks you're doing at 8, love it.
Okay, 16, that's the Seahawks pick, and I do have them trading down. So this is something that I believe is going to occur. I don't think John Schneider's going to wait from
you've been steady on that.
81 to make his selection. So he moves down, and Buffalo is his dance partner. I think you are absolutely on. If this draft falls the way that I've said it, and it's not going to, but you're right. I think Buffalo becomes a real juicy. Even Kansas City gets really aggressive. Like if Nabers going to be a 10 or 11, or Odunze is going to be a 10 and 11, we'll make that move up from 28 or 32 in the Chiefs case. But I'm going to go ahead and I think I'm on this Buffalo thing now. It started off where I thought that Washington would be their best dance partner, but now that Buffalo's traded Diggs, I think they're coming up for a wide receiver. I think the last guy that looks like a potential wide receiver, maybe one WR1 for Josh Allen is Brian Thomas Jr. Of LSU. So Buffalo comes up and gets him. The Seahawks get their 28th pick overall, 60th pick overall, and 2 5ths from a team that has 2 4ths, 3 5ths, 5th rounders, and 2 6th rounders in this draft.
How would you feel, Mike? Mike, I'm going to pull you in on this too. If this trade goes down, what's your immediate reaction?
28 is quite the descent.
I'm going to be pretty nervous.
I think that's if they have something waiting in the wings to move back up a few spots, then I feel better about it. But 28 is quite the climb down the ladder.
Oh, you're really going to hate it when you hear the pick.
Yeah, well, because here's the thing. So if this happens in real time, and those listening and watching on YouTube are gonna see my reaction in real time when this happens.
An additional second, that's tough. Just for an additional second, it's tough.
It is,
and it's a low second.
It is.
Too.
I was funny. I was golfing with a couple of buddies the other day, and we were talking about the draft, and I was like, I'm not sure there's a single thing that the average NFL fan overvalues more than a second round pick. Like the hit rate is just not super high, but everyone's so upset we don't have a second round pick. Like I mean I am too. I wish we had it. I'd rather have Leonard Williams, but whatever. So okay, all right. So now what you just did, Chuck, is create a very tense additional hour for Seahawks fans with this trade.
Well, that's true.
But I love Brian Thomas Jr. for the Bills, and I think they should do whatever they need to do to get him on their team.
All right, I'm going to fly through these next ones, and we'll get we'll get to Seahawks at 28. Right. So Jacksonville takes Adonai Mitchell, not Xavier Worthy.
Nice.
Cincinnati takes Troy Fautanu, which I think is a great fit for them. The Rams then get Dallas Turner, who has fallen in my mock draft all the way to 19. That might be a little scary. 20, Pittsburgh takes Amarius Mims, the giant tackle out of Georgia. Miami replaces, why can't I think of his name? The defensive tackle they just lost free agency to the Raiders.
Christian Wilkins.
With Johnny Newton out of Illinois at 21. Philadelphia takes Terrion Arnold, cornerback out of Alabama. New England gets their next pick from the trade they made earlier. They take Talise Fuaga out of Oregon State. J.C. Latham falls to the Dallas Cowboys at 24.
This is just incredible value.
Green Bay Packers get Cooper DeJean, defensive back out of Iowa at 25. Tampa Bay then gets Jared Verse, the edge from Florida State at 26. Arizona, Chop Robinson out of Penn State at 27.
Okay, all right. There's still one guy here. There's one guy the Seahawks can draft right now that's going to make me real happy.
You're not going to like it.
It's going to be fucking Graham.
Don't do it. Don't do it. Don't fucking draft Junior Colson.
It's not Graham Barton.
Oh God.
You know this is a John. You're going to hear this, and you know You know Seahawks football, both of you.
My God.
You know this is a John Schneider pick right here.
All right.
Edgerrin Cooper.
Oh, my God.
I'm
All
in.
right.
I'm sold.
28. And we'll bash it.
I don't think I'll bash it. I'll be disappointed that they didn't take Newton in that scenario, and I'll be a little disappointed they didn't take Barton. I have warmed to Edgerrin Cooper quite a bit since the first time I saw him mock to Seattle in Danny Heifetz's original mock draft at 32 and in trade with the Chiefs. I was like, really? I don't know about all that. And then, when we were doing our linebacker episode a couple weeks ago, we were talking about him, digging into this guy a little more. I could see it. He just has to be so good.
I would be into that if they got more than just 60.
Well,
right?
so the first, the second, and 2/5.
Yeah, 2/5 are nothing.
Still not enough?
2/5 are nothing to me.
Not to the Seahawks. All of their great picks come in the 5th round.
We're just going to keep doubling down on outlier. You know what Chuck's doing? Chuck is hitting on 18. Chuck's sitting at the blackjack table. He's got a king coming. And an 8, and he's hitting.
I know this guy's counting cards. He's counting cards.
I could feel it in my bones.
All right.
And again, this is not me playing Greg Cosell or Hugh Millen here. This is me gathering information. I've followed this draft. I've followed John Schneider for 8 years, and this is me trying to forecast what I think he's going to do.
And listen,
this is very Jordan Brooksy, and Jordan Brooks is not here. It's very Bobby Wagner-y. Bobby Wagner's not here. It is a position of need. Something tells me that John Schneider drools over Edgerrin Cooper.
Well, and it'll speak to how Mike McDonald wants to build this defense. So, yeah they're going to get benefit of the doubt with me if they draft Cooper. And look, there's a lot of talk about Cooper to Seattle at some way, shape, or form. And I know Daniel Jeremiah has Edgerrin Cooper as his 20th best player in this draft. I think Lance Zierlein has him at 21. I mean, these are dudes who are super dialed in. They think he is far and away the best off-ball linebacker in this class. Sure. 28, man. Let's hope he's good.
Yeah. And I'll just finish it out. Kool-Aid McKinstry to the Lions at 29. Graham Barton at 30 to Baltimore. San Francisco takes Xavier Worthy, and Kansas City gets Ladd McConkey from Georgia. There you go. There's my first.
All right. If that's the case and I'm Seattle, I'm packaging 60, 81, both my new 5ths, my 4th, whatever I got to do to get up and take Johnny Newton at the top of the 2nd round.
No, I had Newton going. I have Newton going to Miami at 21.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I missed that. That's my bad. All right. Okay, I'm into this. The thing that stands out to me about these mock drafts, and I got to say, Chuck, this is one of my favorites because this is not a consensus mock draft, and yet just about all of these moves really do seem reasonable from a need and asset standpoint from each of these teams. Did you have Dallas Turner going to the Rams? Did I catch that?
Yep.
That is infuriating. I was telling Mike, the one thing that I can count on in this draft is I'm going to be so irritated by whoever the Rams take.
Well,
I knew to the Rams.
I knew when I wrote that in, I'm like, man, that is going to scare some people right there. But I'm just not as big on him as what others are, and I'm starting to hear some rumors out there that maybe there are some doubts about his game, not his talent, but his game. So we'll see. So that's a pretty big roll of the dice for me. But again, just gathering information and trying to disperse it in a way that is logical but not formulaic, like so many of the mock drafts end up being.
No, man, I think that was a perfect blend of that. And one of the things that stands out to me about your mock is how many wide receivers you had going in the first round, and how many good wide receiver profiles will still be on the board heading into day 2. And look, man, we've covered just about every position group in this year's class. except for that one. And this is not only my favorite position group this year, it might be my favorite class at any position in a number of seasons. Let's talk wide receivers.
Let's do it.
Now, it's unlikely that Seattle uses anything resembling a high pick on wideout this year. You can make a case that from a pure talent standpoint, Seattle is a top 3, top 5 unit with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jacson, Smith-Njigba. They've used a lot of salary cap space and draft capital to get to that position. So we're going to zoom out from Seattle here a little bit and just talk from an NFL perspective about what is just an unbelievable class of wideouts. And for the sake of this discussion, I went ahead and grouped this class into tiers, not a ton of them, because I think it gets a little blurry after the top 4. But I do believe we have a true big 3 at the top of this class, right? This is not groundbreaking. You got Marvin Harrison Jr. of Ohio State, Malik Nabers out of LSU, Rome Odunze from UW. You had them going as the top 3 wide receivers in your draft class. You had Odunze second and Nabers third, which is a little bit counter to consensus. But talk to me about these guys, who they remind you of, if anyone, and how you would have them on your draft board. We know how you have them in your mock draft based on how you think teams will approach it. But if you were just random team, I am team randomizing. You don't know what team you're going to end up being, and you have to put together a wide receiver big board. How do you stack those top 3?
I do have Marvin Harrison Jr. First. I have compared him in this process to Randy Moss with a good attitude. Now, he's not as fast, and he doesn't quite jump as high, but Randy Moss is one of the most freakish athletes in NFL history. But the size is there, and the skill set is there. So he is my number one guy. I think that, even though in Seattle we love Rome and there's very little not to like about Rome, that I still think Harrison is the clear-cut best player in this draft that's not a quarterback. As a matter of fact, I think he's a better wide receiver prospect than what Williams is as a quarterback prospect. So I think Marvin Harrison's one, but I'm with you. I think on the same shelf, maybe I rank Harrison first, and maybe I think there's a little bit of separation. But I think that on the top tier, you have Nabers from LSU, and I put Rome ahead of even Nabers. So I put Rome in the middle of them. I just don't see where Rome Odunze's weakness is. The size, the speed, the hands, the late hands, which is something that scouts talk about, and it's such an underrated skill for an NFL receiver. He makes such natural catches, and he never gives away that the ball is coming toward him. And so he can just, at the very last second, flash his hands up and just cradle it in for an easy catch. The route running is there. He's a great kid. He's got the attitude that you're looking for. He's got beyond a good personality. He has a magnetic personality. There's just nothing not to like about him. So I'm with you 100%. I think that those 3 guys are on the top tier, and I would rank them Harrison, Odunze, and Nabers. And I really, I know I do my mock draft, but I think the odds are that both Nabers and Odunze are going higher than where I put them in the mock.
Sure. Yeah, I'm same way. That's a clear-cut top 3. I think that, Marvin Harrison Jr. is my number one. His high-end comp, because those are the fun ones, right? No one wants to hear the mid-level comps for these guys. My high-end comp for Marvin Harrison Jr. is Larry Fitzgerald, who is maybe the single most underrated wide receiver of my entire lifetime, and the stats bear that out. He was the best player on almost every field he ever stepped on, and in college was just doing to defenders what Marvin Harrison Jr. did to defenders in college. I think he's number one, but I think Malik Nabers and Rome Odunze would be the number one wide receiver in 80 to 90% of draft classes of the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Which just speaks to how special this group is. To me, Malik Nabers, there's a lot of Jamar Chase comparisons there, and I don't think that's just helmet scouting. To me, the way that he plays reminds me of Jalen Waddle with 15 extra pounds. That's who I see Malik Nabers as. And if you could put 3 inches and 15 pounds on Jalen Waddle, you're talking about true wide receiver one. I'd say you play out this reality 100 times. This is the lens that I view this stuff through is not binary. It is probability focused. And I always think about, okay, if you play out this reality 100 times, how many times does a specific thing happen? You play this out 100 times. I think Malik Nabers is the best wide receiver out of this class. 30 to 40 of those times, I think he's that good. So, wow. Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think if you're shooting for absolute upside, I'm taking Malik Nabers over Rome Odunze. If you're looking for safety, I think Rome Odunze is Devontae Adams, man.
That's my comp for him, and that's why I think that the two of them particularly, it will really depend on who's drafting, because there are a lot of wide receiver needy teams at the top end. Chargers are one if they don't trade out at 5. Even if they do trade out, they're going to be one at 11 potentially. Giants, if they don't go quarterback, I think their next biggest need is to get a playmaking wide receiver. I think Tennessee could use another wide receiver. And I think when Brian Callahan and the Cincinnati Bengals had a chance to choose between a tackle and a wide receiver, they went with Jamar Chase a couple of years ago as the best way to protect Joe Burrow, is to give him a true number one wide receiver. So I think they would be in the market. I don't think the Bears are out of the market at number 9. You know that the Jets are interested in a wide receiver at 10 because Aaron Rodgers is always beating the drum for another weapon to add to his arsenal. So I really think, though, it comes down to what's the need that you have there. And if it's the Jets, I think Rome Odunze's the guy because of the Adams comp. I think it's Aaron Rodgers wanting to can I have young Devontae Adams on my team? So if I've got a choice between Nabers and Odunze, I'm taking him, where Tennessee might go Nabers because it's just a different receiver than what they have in Hopkins and in Ridley. He brings a completely different profile than that, and that gives you sort of 3 different types of weapons in your passing game that you can throw to. So I think Odunze and Nabers are so close to one another that it really is just going to depend on fit, organizational fit, how they would choose between them pick to pick.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. And in this next tier, it's a one-player tier for me, and it's the guy that you had Buffalo trading up with Seattle to take, this Brian Thomas, also out of LSU. And I think the reason, some people listening may be like, well, Seattle isn't going to take a wide receiver. Why would Buffalo trade so much to jump up to 16? It's because the Jaguars are sitting at 17.
Yep.
And I promise you, if Brian Thomas is on the board at 17, Jacksonville is taking them. And so that's what I think Buffalo's doing. That may have been your thought process as well for moving up to 16 is get ahead of Jacksonville. And I love Brian Thomas. He is not as well-rounded as the top 3 guys, but his athleticism is insane. I mean, a sub 4.40 at 210 pounds is wild. I mean, you're counting guys on 2 hands that have ever done that at the combine, and you're talking about guys on 1 hand that have done that with top season production numbers that Brian Thomas has. Now, there's going to be he ran 80% of his routes were either goes, corners, or digs. And when DK Metcalf came out, those were the only routes he was running too. And I think Brian Thomas is good enough. I think that Joe Brady's system is good enough. And I think that Josh Allen is good enough that you can afford to let a player like Brian Thomas develop and hope that he develops the same way that DK Metcalf did and add the extra routes, being average to average plus at the other 6 routes besides those 3 that I mentioned in terms of his development. So I'm big on Brian Thomas, and I think that if he goes to Buffalo, Jacksonville, or Kansas City, he is going to be screaming up fantasy boards.
Yeah, I would just point out 2 extra things about him. One, run after the catch, and not just the ability to run away, something that I would like to see more from DK Metcalf, running through. He is hard to bring down. So he's somebody that can break tackles after catching the football, where a lot of receivers just kind of depend upon running away from defenders. Thomas can run through you, and I'd like to see DK Metcalf used more that way. My gosh, how many times I've just wanted to see him flash on a slant right across the field about 7 yards deep into the secondary, catch the ball on the dead run, and dare a cornerback to try to bring him down. I think that's something you could do with Thomas.
You see, that's something I feel like DK Metcalf does pretty consistently, especially this last year as his average depth of target went down. I see him as a pretty precocious catch the ball short, turn, and look to drive through someone. So I'm curious what we're seeing differently here.
The short, though, is the one-step drop, dump it off to him behind the line of scrimmage. We've seen that plenty. I'm talking about get him going full speed, slanting across the middle of the field, let him catch it and turn upfield and then dare somebody to try to get in his way at full speed. That's something that I don't think they utilize enough. There's way too much, one-on-one, low percentage throw down the sideline, and then to try to get him more touches, they'll just dump off at the line of scrimmage or behind the line of scrimmage and then ask him to run over 5 guys. Yeah. I want to get him in the open field to try to run over one guy.
I hear you there. Gosh, I felt like I saw a lot of those 5 to 7 yard slants to DK this past year, but I think a lot of that had to do with how much the line was struggling too. And it's funny, we're comping Brian Thomas as being this really big, really I don't think fast he's guy to DK Metcalf, and then it's like, oh, he's 25 pounds lighter. No, I don't. Metcalf. Like just for everyone that wants to trade DK, let's just remember what we're talking about trading.
I don't think that they're a comp. I think though, but he does bring the size, the ability to break tackles. As DK has. And then maybe the best attribute of Brian Thomas, and I do think it's a skill, he's got a nose for the end zone. I mean, he caught a touchdown pass every 4 catches this past year. He led the nation in touchdown catches with 17. So he ended up in the end zone every 4 times that he caught a football this year. That's a remarkable ratio. And I don't think that's just a fluke. There might be something flukish about that high of a ratio. And of course, playing in a high-powered offense like LSU is part of it as well. But I think that is a skill. I think that is a talent to have a nose for the end zone.
I agree. Touchdowns are not a sticky stat for wide receivers, except for great wide receivers. And look, if Brian Thomas can be that, here's the thing. Josh Allen's going to throw a lot of touchdowns every year. They got to go to somebody. And there ain't a lot of guys for them to go to right now. So if he goes to Buffalo, I think he becomes an immediate 8+ touchdown per year threat. So yeah, I think you and I are in accord with Brian Thomas kind of as a clear number 4. Now, this next tier, this third tier could be 2 players. It could be 12 players. I am including a pretty large third tier here. I'm going to run through the names really quickly that I have. You can add anyone you like, Chuck, but I'm also going to pull Mike in here on the first 2 names because he and I have been going back and forth on them. So the first 2 names in this third tier for me are the Texas receivers. You got Xavier Worthy, the light guy, right? 167 pounds, sets the combine record, 4.2 140. And then you have Adonai Mitchell, who's way taller, way heavier, and ran a 4.38 and has all of the gifts and everything. Like if you were going to build a receiver in the lab, that's Adonai Mitchell. I also am including Ladd McConkey, who you had as a first-round pick, I believe, to the Chiefs in your mock draft. I've got Troy Franklin out of Oregon, Keon Coleman out of Florida State, Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, Roman Wilson from Michigan, Ricky Pearsall from Florida, and the 2 UW receivers, Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan. I want to get your thoughts on all of them first, but I'm going to bring in my boy Mike here real quick to talk about these Texas receivers. So I'm an Xavier Worthy guy. Mike is an Adonai Mitchell guy. Mike, the floor is yours.
It's true. So, we've gone back and forth a lot on this. And if I can 8-mile you here for a second, I understand the arguments against AD Mitchell. All right.
I do live in a trailer with my mom.
That's right. You sure do, buddy. I understand.
My best friend Bob shot himself.
Chatter Bob.
I understand that, okay, AD Mitchell, freak athlete, those guys, when they have low production, they usually don't translate to production in the NFL. All right. I understand that Xavier Worthy, he had the drop season school. A lot of the time, that's not a very sticky stat. I understand that AD Mitchell's down-to-down production and effort is not all that great. For me, this is kind of a flavor preference thing in terms of like Odunze versus Nabers, right? If you want the burner with the crazy yak ability, Nabers might be your guy. I'm more of a shifty X kind of guy rather than an elite Z. I want a guy, if we can equate this to basketball like we so often do for receivers, I don't necessarily like Klay Thompson, for example. You have to chase him around the floor, and if you leave him open for a split second, he can burn you from deep. But I love a guy that can just go get a bucket. And AD Mitchell is that dude. He's wiggly. He's got hands. He's got jump ball ability. He's kind of like that Rome Odunze style of receiver with more question marks. Something I will say about the production for Mitchell, okay, yeah, he didn't have the pure volume, but this guy played in 5 college football playoff games, including 2 national championships, and he had a touchdown in every single one of those games, including in his true sophomore campaign. Well, in his true freshman year, he caught the go-ahead touchdown in the national championship. And the next year, he was injured, I believe, in week 2, didn't play the rest of the season, came back in the Peach Bowl against Ohio State, the CJ Stroud game, had 3 catches and a touchdown. And I don't know, man. I love a bucket getter. I understand, though, if you're a GM whose reputation and job is built upon making these decisions and what's the best bet, I can understand wanting to take Worthy. A lot of the stuff with AD Mitchell and a lot of those cons, I feel like might be able to be attributed to Quinn Ewers. I'm not a Quinn Ewers guy. And if he's a guy that you can't rely on, AD Mitchell, that is, down to down in terms of effort, I feel like an inconsistent quarterback might be a stressor that will exacerbate those issues, which is to say that if we've seen him going at 28 to the Bills a lot, if you put him with Josh Allen, I feel like that can assuage some of that stuff and push him to give that effort and focus on a more regular basis. But again, you know.
Well, this is also, Mike, professional football. Okay. So this is a full-time job now. This is, you never know when you demand of somebody to act professionally. Some of those sophomoric traits of his, can be, I mean, if I'm a GM, I'm taking the talented guy. I'm taking that guy you described. And I'm saying to my coaching staff, where I've got a head coach, I got an offensive coordinator, I got a full-time position coach, I got veterans, some of them 30, 35 years old in my receiver room. And I think I got a leadership that I'm going to stay on this guy's ass. And I want to err on the side of the all-around talent. And then I'm going to leave it to my leaders, coaches and players alike, to make sure this guy doesn't slip through the cracks, because I'm with you. I think I see something special. I know I've watched plenty of baseball games where I'm like, you just did a favor to the other team by taking out a pitcher that they couldn't hit just because his pitch count, just because the matchup in the book said that it was time to go to your lefty out of the pen. You just did them a favor. They're celebrating right now in the dugout. I had that same sort of experience when Washington played Texas. I'm like, whenever you don't throw to Mitchell, I celebrate, because this guy might be unstoppable tonight. Like when he was driven, when he was playing with passion, when he was trying to make it to a national championship game, I mean, I was relieved when they weren't looking his way. And that's about as great a compliment as I can give to a wide receiver.
Yeah, he's a big game player, and that in itself is kind of an indictment in that, okay, how are you going to perform in a random week in the middle of November, right? But if you're inside the red zone, who do you want in your huddle? I want AD Mitchell, and I think Texas did too. On the last play of that Sugar Bowl, they threw it up to their jump ball guy, and if Quinn Ewers had any ounce of decisiveness in his body, if he ripped that throw in there, it's a touchdown. Elijah Jacson got his legendary moment, but every single big play that Washington gave up this year through the air, odds are you're going to see Elijah Jacson with his face mask in the turf on the other end of that completion. And like I said, if he goes to Buffalo or somewhere with a quarterback that can actually make the throws, that's just a skill set I want to bet on. I will say also that Tyler Dunn and Go Long had a pretty in-depth piece on Mitchell being a type 1 diabetic, and I won't pretend to have any insight on that. And, the infrastructure around him to help regulate blood sugar levels. But there's a lot that goes into this, and GMs, like we talked about, are going to make a pick based on what is the best bet, playing the numbers game. And I totally understand making the Worthy pick if that's your preference, but AD Mitchell is my type of receiver, man.
All right.
Jacson just taking it all in.
All right. Valid points across the board. You guys have convinced me. You know what? I can't argue with that. You guys, I'm just kidding. Listen, you want to talk to me about a guy. First of all, I'm not going to start this off by why I'm not an AD Mitchell guy. I'm going to start this off by why I'm an Xavier Worthy guy. Look, he's small. I get it. And you're like, oh, John Ross didn't do anything. Darius Hayward-Bay didn't do anything. Henry Ruggs didn't do anything. All these guys that lit the combine on fire with their straight line speed. That is not Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy is Tank Dell with afterburners. This guy runs every single route on the tree. Yeah, he's got drops. You know who else has a lot of drops? DK Metcalf. You know who else has a lot of drops? Deontay Johnson. Drops are reflective of targets earned. These guys have been in the same offense for multiple years with the same quarterback, and that quarterback has chosen to throw targets to Xavier Worthy at twice the frequency that he's chosen to throw targets to Adonai Mitchell. And there is a reason for that. It's because you can count on full effort from Xavier Worthy on every single play. This is a guy who can win short. He's a guy who can win intermediate, and he's a guy that can beat you deep. Literally no one in combine history has run faster than he did. This is a complete player. Now, my issue, look, I get the siren song of Adonai Mitchell, and he's tall and he's big and he's fast and he's a touchdown maker, and we love all of that stuff. The number one indicator of NFL production at wide receiver is college production. And Adonai Mitchell, outside of touchdowns, doesn't have it. His career yards per route run are the low, assuming he goes in the first round, will be the lowest of any first round wide receiver ever since they started tracking in 2011. 13 years of data, 14 years of data. No wide receiver taken in the first round, which I think is approaching 50 at this point, has had a lower yards per route run than Adonai Mitchell. This is a guy who takes plays off, who has frustrated his coaches. If he's not the first read, he ain't trying. And you're telling me he's just going to flip that switch all of a sudden when he gets to the NFL? You're telling me you're just going to count on this guy to score touchdowns? Scoring touchdowns in the NFL is really freaking tough to do. And they're not just going to be there because you're the number 5 team in the country and you're only playing 2 or 3 tough games a year. Now, you're right. He's scored touchdowns in those tough games. He hasn't put up a lot of production in those games. He is not who his quarterback is looking for. There is nothing indicating to me that that's all of a sudden going to change at the highest level of professional football. Now, look, if he goes to the Bills or the Jaguars or the Chiefs and Xavier Worthy goes to the Panthers, yes, I will bet that Adonai Mitchell is a more productive receiver in the first couple of seasons. But if they both go to similar situations, I'm taking Worthy every single time. I want the guy that earns targets. The number one talent that a wide receiver can have, in my opinion, is the ability to earn his quarterback's targets. And Xavier Worthy doubled up Mitchell in that regard. I am taking him 9 times out of 10, and the only time that I'm not taking him over Mitchell is purely situation based. And Mike, I'm glad you brought up the type 1 diabetes thing. One of my best friends has it. My wife's best friend's daughter has it. And look, it is a lifestyle thing. It is something that you need to manage. And by all accounts, he's not managing it. And if you have a health marker that is this obvious to somebody and they are not taking the effort to make sure that they are taking care of their body in a special way to be ready every single day to succeed at a high level. And keep in mind his production in college football, this is not high-level production. These are high-level attributes. And if he is not taking care of his body in the way that he needs to deal with the type 1 diabetes, to be a high-level college producer, I do not want to task my wide receiver room. I do not want to task my coaching staff with having to monitor this guy and make sure that he's constantly trying to reach his potential, or that he's even providing his body with the necessary tools to reach a baseline of NFL production. Give me Xavier Worthy all day long. If I'm a team and I've got these two guys on my draft board as the top two, I'm taking Worthy. So that's the Worthy side. Y'all got the Mitchell side. The NFL is going to tell us which one of us is right.
That's reasonable. And one last thing I'll add, I'm glad that you brought up the siren song because, the Mitchell thing is a traits thing, right? Like, he's an absolute monster without the consistency. I'll just say this. If the Bills struck on Josh Allen, why not roll the dice again, baby? Come on.
Totally. I get it. And that is the thing is you are betting on the outlier because he is an outlier physically. And if you get him in the right situation and you get him to lock in and handle his business, yes. I think if I'm taking the top 5% outcome of Adonai Mitchell versus the top 5% outcome of Xavier Worthy, I'm taking Adonai Mitchell. The other 95% of those outcomes, I'm taking Worthy. So we're going to see. And I think that's going to be a really interesting thing to circle back to in a year, 2 years, even 3 years from now and see how those guys are doing. But lines are drawn.
Years, I'm going to have some words for you, man.
See you.
That's fair enough. Now, I do want to talk about the rest of the guys that I have in this tier, and I'm just going to run the names back. And then Chuck, you just talk to me about the guys that pop out to you, whatever thoughts jump into your head as I read through these names. We got Ladd McConkey again out of Georgia, Troy Franklin from Oregon, Keon Coleman from Florida State, Xavier Legette from South Carolina, Roman Wilson from Michigan, Ricky Pearsall from Florida, and the two Jalens from UW, Polk and McMillan. Talk to me, Chuck.
The one I think is going to have the best career is Ricky Pearsall out of Florida. I think he's incredibly skilled and sneaky athletic. The 40, the vert, everything checked out at the combine, and he has ridiculous playmaking abilities. So I actually think statistically he's going to go on of that group and have the best career out of all of them. Let's see. That list, I didn't write it all down. Who was the second guy that you mentioned?
We had Troy Franklin.
Troy Franklin is on the other side. And he was very productive in college, so I don't want to pick on him. But in this draft process, I'm not going to weigh the NFL combine for good or bad with too much weight, but he looked absolutely lost. He looked like he couldn't follow a direction.
Yep.
Like everybody else was doing it, and Franklin couldn't run a straight line, couldn't follow any of the skills that they were the exercises that they were laying out in front of people. I mean, he looked lost out there.
Troy Franklin is pure vibes, man.
So
there's no mechanics. It's just athleticism and vibes.
He doesn't seem to be falling. As a matter of fact, recently I think he's been rising in the draft, but that was a little concerning to me. But he's going to get drafted. I think day 2, probably round 2. And that list that you listed off, that's normally some guys that are going to be considered in the first round, but not with this year's class. Those are second, third round picks because of how much talent is out there at the skill. It kind of makes you wish that the Seahawks weren't so set at wide receiver. We don't really get to play in this sandbox.
There's only 3 receivers in this draft that I like better than Seattle has, and obviously, none of them will be there for Seattle. I'm taking Jacson Smith-Njigba over everyone beyond the top 3.
Yeah. Well, I certainly need to see more. He seemed to be blaming that on Shane Waldron last year.
I am too.
I am looking forward to seeing him with a different kind of scheme this year because, you think back to training camp a year ago and he was the talk of camp and there didn't seem to be anything he couldn't do. And then he just looked so he looked used in such a simple way a year ago. So I'm looking forward to seeing him broaden his horizons this year.
Yeah, well, and I mean, just zooming back in on the Seahawks here, I mean, I think Jacson Smith-Njigba is the fulcrum for this offense. I think that this offense last year was using 30% of what he could do, and I think there is so much else out there. You could just feel it from him. That is like, just turn me loose. And look, the guy had 2 game-winning touchdowns in the final minute this year. Like, game on the line, Geno Smith and Drew Lock went to Jacson Smith-Njigba against the Browns and the Eagles, and he came through with game winners. I think he's that guy. But that's going to be really interesting to see. I think that some of these guys in this draft, and keep in mind, we're talking like, Jacson Smith-Njigba, it's so disappointing. Well, yeah, sure, you took him at 20 overall. You'd love to see some more stats. How many third wide receivers ever, especially as rookies, had 63 catches? Right? I mean, this is a guy that was doing the most that he could with the lowest average depth of target in the NFL. That's not a Jacson Smith-Njigba indictment. That's a Shane Waldron and a Seahawks offensive line indictment. But some of the other guys that really stand out to me that I'm super interested in, I think Keon Coleman is probably, outside of AD Mitchell, I think he's the biggest lightning rod guy. He's someone that he ran a 4.6. This is a guy who was freaking Chris Collinsworth. Here's a guy. This is someone that he has this reputation as this freak athlete, right? I mean, he played basketball for Tom Izzo at Michigan State and then transferred to Florida State and was their punt returner at 6'4". I mean, he is the ultimate. The tape is different than the analytics, right? He wasn't even the best receiver. Again, like Adonai Mitchell at Texas, he wasn't even the most productive receiver at Florida State. Johnny Wilson was. But when you look at the talent, I mean, I'm what I see when I see Keon Coleman is Cordero Patterson, just a big, strong dude who is great with the ball in his hands, but is completely unrefined. I think that he's one of those guys where right situation, he could be an absolute supernova in the NFL because, he ran the 4.6 at the combine. And it's like, oh, what the hell's going on here? I thought this guy was supposed to be fast. And then they do that gauntlet drill, the one that Troy Franklin flunked so badly, where you got to run a straight line and catch 6 balls, turning one way, and then you turn the other way and you're catching all of this. Well, look, they're timing that too. And no player had a higher top speed during that drill. And this boy kept his line the whole way through. He had the fastest speed running that gauntlet drill. So I think this is a true game day player. I'm really curious to see where he goes. Xavier Leggett, super interesting in that he was a 5-year player in college, did nothing. I think his top season was like 430 yards in his first 4 years. He goes to South Carolina, becomes Spencer Rattler's just drop back. Where's Leggett? I'm throwing it to him. All of a sudden, he explodes. Monster season his final year at South Carolina. Saw an interview with him. We talked about this, I think, last week, where he was like, he was asked, what was the turning point? How come you didn't do anything for 4 years and all of a sudden you were so good in year 5? You said, I looked at DK Metcalf and decided to model my game after him. I think he's going to be super interesting. I'm with you. Of all the guys in this group, Ricky Pearsall is my, Ladd McConkey, Xavier Worthy, probably a tier break with those two. But of the next group, I think Ricky Pearsall is just a guy that, one of the things that I like, if you don't have all of the crazy physical measurements as a wide receiver, the number one thing I'm looking for from you is, can you win a game of tag? And you ain't ever catching Ricky Pearsall in a game of tag. And we saw it. He ran a 4.4. He jumped 42 inches. I think he had the highest vert and longest broad of any of the wide receivers. Super explosive. He's got a terrible bet on me tattoo, which is exactly what I want to see from my wide receivers. Like, that's what I'm talking about right there. Ricky Pearsall out of Florida is going to make a team really, really happy on day 2.
What the hell happened to the Herm Edwards Arizona State Sun Devils?
Oh my gosh.
Daniels and Ricky Pearsall were not good together.
I know it, man. It is so nuts how much talent that they had there and how bad they were. Yeah, man. I tell you what, there's going to be teams picking in the 70s and 80s getting wide receivers that would be going in the 30s and 40s in most years.
And I don't think the Seahawks are going to be in the wide receiver game. I with Rob Ring today on the radio show, and we did our Seahawks mocks, and so we mocked them all the way through round 7, and I did not have them taking a wide receiver. Normally, you do have, you just grab a wide receiver because it's a very deep room. But I do have them taking 2 tight ends, which is something that, since we're talking about pass catchers, I think Jack Westover is a better version of Jacob Hollister, who Schneider really liked once upon a time. And then Eric All from Iowa, another Iowa tight end, is somebody that
when has that literally ever worked out for anybody?
What, an Iowa tight end?
Yeah, an Iowa tight end. Oh yeah, that's a dead end right there.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think maybe they're gonna have. I think there's a pretty good chance they're taking at least they're taking 1 tight end. I think they could take 2, and maybe it's not a wide receiver year for the Seahawks, but you got to be tempted. You got to consider it because of how deep the class is. And that was one thing that Rob pointed out. I'm not going to come out of this without giving the Seahawks one of these wide receivers this year, even though the guy he gave him was really just like a punt return specialist. It's great to have depth at wide receiver, but then you kind of sit there as the draft's going to go by. You're going to see all these quality players getting taken, and it might not be where the Seahawks have any need whatsoever.
Yeah, there's 3 other guys that I think have a chance. They're like late day 2, maybe day 3 picks. Look, everyone's who's the next Puka Nacua? There's not a next Puka Nacua, but there will be day 3 pass catchers that a year from now we're like, how did they last that long? And the 3 that I kind of have circled are Javon Baker out of Central Florida, Johnny Wilson out of Florida State, and Malik Washington from Virginia. And to your point, yeah, Seattle probably doesn't need to add to their wide receiver room because I think Jake Bobo is I think he's a very good wide receiver. And if he's your number 4, I don't think you need to.
And you've added Chenault.
And you've added Claypool. I don't think that you need to go chasing a wide receiver in this draft with needs elsewhere. And I think early in the draft, you take best player available, but I think you get to late day 2 and beyond. Now you do have to draft for need. And whatever needs you still have after free agency are real needs. But I think tight end is one of them. We have Noah Fant and nothing else. There's a lot of talk about Johnny Wilson from Florida State being a tight end at the next level. Yeah. And I would love him in Seattle. Yeah, 6'6". I think he was 6'7", 238 at the combine officially.
Oh.
I mean, we're talking about big boy, and having him as the number 2, especially in short yardage and goal line sets as a touchdown option or a first down option, I think is really, really interesting. So Look, man, I mean, we could talk about wide receivers for 2 hours. There's a half a dozen guys I wish we had time to talk about, but here's the thing. You and I, we've been talking for 2 months damn near about what we think on the draft. And that's great. Because we are great. I'm great. You're great. It's important that people hear what we have to say. But one thing we've learned on this show is there's a lot of wisdom in this crowd. And so we solicited some questions as we head into the end of our last episode of the Whitewater Drafting series prior to the draft. We solicited some questions from the people listening. And Mike, you've got a few that you want to talk about on air, yeah?
Sure do. All right, we got this question from a couple people, both from Tom Le Du Fromage and from Cindy Shell. They both ask, who is a player that if they are available at 16 for Seattle, that you're not taking any calls on, that you're just pulling the trigger on, no questions asked?
Who's a player? I'm doing that. Well, I'm doing Michael Penix Jr. I'm taking him.
That's big, man.
I'm taking him.
If he's there at 16, look, I don't hate it. Everyone listening knows how much I like Michael Penix Jr. And I think that he represents the perfect crossroads of, do you take the best player available? Do you take a position of need? I do not consider quarterback a position of need. I see no reason Geno Smith cannot continue to be a top 10 to top 14 quarterback in the NFL for the next 2 to 3 years. But if you really believe in Michael Penix, you have the opportunity to save that money and to get that real salary cap delta at the highest paid position in sports. If you think he's that guy, if Seattle took him at 16, I would talk myself into it pretty quickly.
I would take him. I don't think they will. I think he could be there at 16, and they're still going to move back from that selection. I think the guy that they might be tempted to keep legitimately that could be around is Byron Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there will be some real curiosity. I mean, we still don't know how Mike McDonald's going to flavor this Seahawk draft process. This will be our first taste of it. So I kind of had an idea. I think I'd learned how Pete and John drafted, but there's going to be a new wrinkle to this year. And so is Murphy exactly the kind of guy that he might want to build around? I think if Brock Bowers is there, they take him, even though, maybe don't put that as the number one need for this team. But I think there's a scenario. I mean, this is the draft. I mean, there are a couple of guys, I promise you, that if they're on the board, John Schneider's not going to trade down. But I think realistically, I'm 97% sure that this is going to be a trade down move from 16.
Yeah, to give my answer to that question, there is one player that if he's still there, that I think like realistically could still be there, where if I'm John Schneider, I'm turning my phone off and sprinting to the podium, and that is Brock Bowers. I think Brock Bowers is a top 6, top 7 player in this draft. I think whoever ends up with him is going to have just a locked in Pro Bowl caliber player, and his best seasons are going to be all pro caliber at an important position in the NFL. That's the one guy. Short answer, Brock Bowers. I'm not considering a trade down. I can't believe he's
here. I agree with that. Yeah, but I'll take him.
There's a handful of other players that I'd be really happy to take. You mentioned Byron Murphy. I think Quinyon Mitchell is the best defensive player in this draft. If they just want to go overboard on corner, I'm good with that. Leatu Latu is in that conversation. I'd be super happy with Johnny Newton. Troy Fatanu obviously has been my guy all the way through this series. Be super happy with any of those dudes at 16, but the only one where I'm saying this guy is still here, I'm not taking any calls, get to that podium as fast as you can, it's Brock Bowers.
I like it.
All right, next question from Bobo Fett at Largent's Burner. Bobo asks Jacson, what cigars do you have lined up for this weekend?
Funny you ask, Bobo Fett. So, as we mentioned at the top of this show, we got a new line of Cigar Thoughts cigars coming out. And this is not just, oh, hey, we're so happy to have this blend. The Red Zone cigars have been personally selected by yours truly out of about 9 different blends of cigars. What one do I want to put my name on? It's going to be that. But if we're going outside of the Cigar Thoughts range, and look, dollar for dollar, you're just not going to beat the Red Zone cigars or the Cigar Thoughts originals. And it's just true. I mean, these are cigars that sell for $40 a pop. And you can get them for less than $15. But if we're going to go outside of those two, it's the draft. This is where I get real freaky. This is where I reach. So I got 2 different humidors at home. So most of my cigars, they're in Mylar bags. They got the Bavita humidification pack. They're just sitting in these giant gallon bags and they're fine. I got room for 50 cigars in my 2 humidors. And one of them, I keep my Cigar Thought cigars in. The other, I keep the real special ones. So I got a 1946 anniversary Padron that I will be smoking. That's been aged for 20 years. Won a box of those in a poker tournament. I'm going to bust one of those out for the first round. I'm going to be smoking the Cigar Thought cigars throughout the draft. And then I am pulling out my final Year of the Rooster Zodiac series from Davidoff. I've been saving this one, wondering what the occasion is going to be. That's going to be my day 2 smoke for the draft this year.
God, you are a sicko.
He's got it thought out.
Yes, I am.
He's given that more thought than Schneider's given the draft itself.
Oh, I got my lineup, baby. I have my big board of stogies at home.
What cigar are you trading out of 16 for? Okay. Last question comes in from Beegertron 5000, loyal listener. Beegertron asks, and this is interesting. Mentions that they keep seeing a trade floated for the 3rd overall pick from New England for Seattle's first this year, their first next year, and DK Metcalf. So a move of that magnitude up the draft board would have to be for a quarterback. I think we're all in agreement.
Yeah.
If Jaden Daniels or Drake May are available at number 3 and the Seahawks can pull the trigger on that trade, would either of you guys do it?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to go back to like the first conversation we had in Whitewater Drafting. Why is there such a dearth between Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix Jr.? Mm-hmm. So I'll put Daniels ahead of Penix, I suppose. But if I can pick at 16 or move up, if I really wanted to have a quarterback, I'd move up to like 12, get ahead of Vegas, and then maybe potentially get Michael Penix versus giving up a lot of draft capital to get from 16 to 3 and have to part with a wide receiver who I still don't think we've tapped into his full capabilities. So I'm going to say no to that trade. If it was for Caleb Williams all the way up to number 1, maybe I consider that, but I'm not doing it because I don't think there's that big of a difference between Penix and May or Daniels.
Yeah, there's only one player I would even consider making that trade for, and it's Caleb Williams. After that, look, and I want to give a shout out to Beegertron because that's a good question, and I don't mean to be dismissive of it. You don't get better by trading the best player on your team, and there's a really strong argument to be made that the best player on your team is a 6'4", 233-pound, 26-year-old wide receiver with borderline Olympic speed that has a proven track record of NFL production. You want to look at the number of wide receivers that have put out the type of numbers in the first 5 years that DK Metcalf has. You're talking about single digits ever. You are not making life easier for this next quarterback by taking away his best teammate and by taking away 2 future first-round opportunities to make things better around him. The best thing that you can do for your quarterback is to furnish the house that he's going to move into. We've seen Chicago do it. That is the blueprint. And there is not a quarterback outside of Caleb Williams that I think that you sell all of your furniture for in order to get. So no, I would not do that. I would be a pretty sullen dude if they made that trade. I'm not into it.
Yep.
All right. So here's the deal. We've been going at this for almost 2 months now. And look, I have just enjoyed the hell out of Whitewater Drafting. I almost kicked myself for it taking this long, and a big shout out to Chuck because he's the one that put this in motion. He's the one that reached out and said, hey, we should do this. And I am so glad that we did. But now we've only got a couple days left before the draft. And so, Chuck, if there was one thought that you could leave the listeners with before we enter the pageantry, the festivity, and the Christmas morning of draft day, what is the one thing you want listeners to take away?
Oh, boy. I think it's just the, I don't want to get sappy. I don't want to make Mike cry at this stage.
Too late.
Yeah. But it's just, there's still people that roll their eyes at this process. Some people call it a crapshoot. I can't stand hearing that because I think general managers across the National Football League would be offended to think that the most important day of their lives every year was just a crapshoot. I think this is what separates the great teams from the bad teams, and there is a reason why there's not as much parity in a league that has a salary cap versus Major League Baseball that doesn't. And yet there's a greater variety of teams that make the baseball playoffs than make the NFL playoffs. And it's because the ones that do this job well, the 3 days that we have, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, typically make the playoffs all the time. And so this is a huge process. I don't ever want to see it go away. This is what separates the bad from the good teams in the National Football League, and probably is what Seattle has struggled with in the last years. Probably why they haven't been a dominant force. They haven't drafted as well as they once did when they nearly built a dynasty about 10 years ago. So I love to see John Schneider and Mike McDonald get on the same page. Want to see the Seahawks get back to drafting beautifully like they did a decade ago. And this is where you build your championship. It's on these 3 days. It's not a crapshoot. It's the lifeblood of the National Football League.
Yeah, I actually love that take, because my one takeaway is the flip side of that coin. And I don't think that you're wrong. I think that the greatest ability to maximize a market inefficiency in the NFL is nailing a draft. I think it's way harder than most of us actually think that it is. Here's my one takeaway. The people that are paid millions of dollars to do this, the people who are supposedly the best in the world, that employ teams of scouts and analysts that are working 80 hours a week leading up to this process, get it wrong all the time. Yeah. You are projecting 20, 21, 22-year-olds, how they're going to handle millions of dollars in fame and attention and a demand on their time and their attention and their work ethic and their health that they have never encountered before, even at these top end Division I schools. And so my main takeaway is it is a little bit of a crapshoot. And we saw John Schneider have arguably the greatest 3-year run in drafting history from 2010 to 2012 in terms of AAV, which essentially is a metric designed to show production over replacement level. It's NFL's WAR stat to make the baseball comparison. 2010 through 2012, no team in history has had a higher AAV for their drafts than the Seahawks did. And they completely shit the bed for like 5 years after that. And I don't believe that they just changed their process, that the NFL landscape is constantly shifting sand. And something that worked even 3 years ago doesn't necessarily work now. And the NFL figured out Seattle's Legion of Boom defense and how to beat that cover 3, even with Hall of Fame talent. And you saw so many NFL teams adapt that approach to big corners and a free-ranging safety and a hard-hitting strong safety and all of these things. And look, Seattle never really figured out how to counterpunch. Now, I think they've drafted really well the last 2 years. They also had a lot of draft capital to do that. Most of the time, your team has one pick each round, and those first 3 rounds, look, here's the thing.
But I think I can explain that away, though, because I think they did have something flawed philosophically. They were trying to doppelgang their drafts, those 3 ridiculously successful ones. They were trying to find the next Richard Sherman. They were trying to find the next Michael Bennett, and they were drafting people that were built like them, had 40 times like them, and physically reminded them of them. Richard Sherman was special not because of his height and his 40 time. Richard Sherman was special because there wasn't anybody that was as tenacious and as, skilled and as instinctive at the cornerback position in the history of this franchise. And I think you could say Michael Bennett, how many times have they tried to replace him with somebody physically like him? Michael Bennett, there were these just traits about him. So I think that's what went wrong. They tried repeating all the successes they did by trying to draft guys that mimicked the physical traits of the ones before them, and they lost out on what it was that made those guys special. I think that's where they kind of lost their way a little bit, and that's why they haven't been as successful drafting in the last few years.
Which is exactly my point.
Yeah.
NFL teams have to be constantly adjusting.
Yeah.
The Seahawks
I'll give you that.
The Seahawks built that team because they started boxing lefty against the NFL. Mm-hmm. And then the NFL figured that out, and they didn't have a counterpunch to that. And the thing is, like, your draft, yeah, sure, we would love for every player that your favorite team drafts this year to make an immediate impact. That's not a realistic expectation. You should judge draft classes 2 years, 3 years, 4 years down the road.
True.
And by the time you're doing that, the NFL landscape has shifted. Look no further than last year, where you saw points come down by 3 points a game. You saw yards come down by 40 yards a game. The NFL changed because people realized the most successful offenses were living and dying off of explosive plays. And so they shifted to a defensive structure that takes that away. And we saw, I mean, this is the genius of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. They lose Tyreek Hill, who might be the best wide receiver on the planet. And they just adjusted, said, okay, we'll just start throwing it shorter, but we're going to build an offense that does that. They pivoted, right? We've seen the Ravens pivot. We've seen the Steelers pivot. These teams that are in the playoffs every single year, the Packers, they pivot. The Packers team now that damn near beat the 49ers, that were this close to being a Super Bowl team with the youngest roster in the NFL, pivoted.
Yeah.
Whatever your assumption about what your team needs to do in the draft because of how the NFL looks, I am just begging the people listening to understand that in 2 years, what's going to win in the NFL is probably going to look different than what won last year. And that is the hardest thing. So give your team a little bit of grace. And I'm just asking the listeners to take a 3-year mindset to some of these draft picks. I mentioned Davante Adams earlier as a comp for Rome Odunze. Chuck, you agreed he was your comp for Rome Odunze. Davante Adams didn't do shit for 2 years, right? Like, there's a lot of people writing him off as a waste of a second-round pick, and then he spent 5 years being arguably the best wide receiver in the NFL. So just my one big takeaway is give yourself and give your favorite team some grace. View this through a 3-year lens.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of strange because I think you argued that my point was making your point. I would argue your point is making my point because you're right. And the great general managers see how the league is changing and adapt their drafts accordingly. Ozzie Newsome was never caught off guard. Ozzie Newsome was always ahead of the curve. And there are a couple special ones like that. I think John is very good at this, but he hasn't been as good lately, and I think it's because he was trying to recreate what worked 10 years ago versus seeing what was going to work next.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. So I completely agree with that.
It's been a blast, gentlemen.
Oh man, this has been one of the most fun stretches we've ever had doing this podcast, man. And look, that's going to do it for the final episode of Whitewater Drafting. Thank you again to Chuck Powell. Look, Chuck, you made this happen, man. Thank you so much for putting this in motion.
Well, I put it in motion, but you guys made it happen. I give you guys all the credit. Thank you very much for everything that you did with this, and we'll make it even bigger and better next year.
Hey, amen to that. Okay, friends, you can find Mike, Chuck, and I on social media. I am on Twitter at Jacson Bevins. That's JACSON. Remember that no K is okay when spelling my name. Chuck is at Chuck Powell, KJR. Mike is at Mike Barwin. And the show itself is at Cigar Thoughts. You can catch full video episodes on our YouTube channel at Cigar Thoughts and find the rest of our socials at cigarthoughtsnfl.com. And listen to Chuck every weekday morning on KJR Sports Talk Radio 93.3 FM, starting at 10 a.m. This episode is brought to you by Balvenie Premium Single Malt Scotch Whiskey. I've long been a huge fan of their lineup, and we are thrilled to have them on board as a sponsor of the show. If you're watching on YouTube, you've seen me enjoying a glass of their 15-year Madeira cask, which is yet another excellent bottle from Balvenie. One of the best things about a great Scotch is how well it plays with a good cigar. And speaking of, starting on draft day, we'll have a brand new line of cigars to offer. The Red Zone series is the second release from Cigar Thoughts, combining rich flavor with the lightness that comes from its Connecticut wrapper. This particular blend is made with the same quality of tobacco that the Cigar Thoughts originals have, but boasts a slightly different overall experience. The new line will be at the same low price of $149 for a bundle of 10 that you're used to with the originals, and which is far less than half of what these blends sell for on cigars on the open market. Normally, a box of 10 cigars with this level of tobacco sells for close to $400, but these can be yours for just $149. So stay in scoring position with your own bundle of Red Zone cigars from Cigar Thoughts and Seattle Cigar Concierge. As many of you know, we partnered with one of the most prestigious cigar manufacturers in the world to release these official Cigar Thoughts cigars, which you can order directly from cigarthoughtsnfl.com. Just follow the link on the show page to get these easy-to-smoke stogies rolled with 13-year aged premium Dominican tobacco leaf, or hit us up on Twitter or Instagram and we'll send you the details directly. And these cigars, they come with a Bovita humidification pack and a Mylar storage bag to make sure they stay fresh whether you have a humidor or not. Of course, you can listen to this show and read every article at fieldgoals.com. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and you like the show, drop us a 5-star rating and leave a quick review. Thank you to all of y'all listening for your continued support of the show. We know you've only got so much time for podcasting in your life, and it's an honor to be a part of that for y'all. Please know that by sharing the show on social media and with your friends, you give us the juice to keep making this happen. We'll be back very soon, but in the meantime, onwards and upwards, my friends.